Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CRE PN Radio. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jay Darren Gross. This is the podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Today, my guest is Matthew Baltzell. Matthew is the former host of the Real Estate Journeys podcast, a top 400 business podcast, and he is a real estate investor with a portfolio of 743 units and 4 years of asset management experience. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with Matthew about how to attract capital like a boss with podcasting. But first, a quick reminder, if you like our show, CRE PN Radio, there are a couple things you can do to help us out. You can like, share, and subscribe. And as always, we encourage you to leave a comment. We love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you want to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. You can find us on YouTube at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And while you're there, please subscribe. With that, I want to welcome my guest, Matthew. Welcome to CRE PN Radio.
Darren, pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, pleasure's mine, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Likewise.
But before we get started, if you could take just a minute and share with the listeners a little bit more about your background.
Yeah. So, we spoke a little off air, but so currently I'm located in Chiang Mai, Thailand. We're halfway around the world. I basically, people always ask me, how do I wind up in Thailand? Do I plan on staying in Thailand? And so basically a high level overview is I left the States back in 2016 and I attempted to move to Germany and I had a failed attempt there. So I wound up traveling the world, moved to Thailand, fell in love, got married in 2018, had a kid 2020, COVID happened, stayed, having another baby, have a house. So in the meantime, while I was abroad, I wanted to get involved in basically multifamily commercial real estate, right? And this was back in like 2018 when things kind of started picking up for multifamily. People were doing podcasts, and I was thinking of my next move and how I could basically get in the industry, but I'm still halfway around the world. So what I did is I went on Bigger Pockets, I went into forums, and I basically created a digital meetup, and I had anywhere from 6 to 8 members at the time. And one person who didn't join the meetup just was following my progress. And after about 2 or 3 months, this person reached out to me and said, "Hey, I like what you're doing. Why don't I introduce you to a principal at a private equity firm who's basically starting from the ground up?" And that's how I got my foot in through the door. And then I basically worked for that company for years and was doing investor relations, working with the asset management, and was basically able to get my foot in the door. I started a podcast while I was abroad that had 114 episodes as well. It's no longer in syndication, but that's a little bit about me, how I got into commercial real estate and how I started a podcast and a business as well.
Awesome. I love the fact that being abroad didn't keep you from, doing it. I think there's the old school traditional real estate was always, invest within X number of hours or time or miles from home, kind of thing. And clearly the tool, the internet, the ability to connect with others and make things happen has not, kept you from being successful in investing in real estate. Or unless maybe I'm missing something. Are your units, or did you invest in Thailand, or did you?
No. So I invested in the syndication deals through the company. So we had properties, or we still do have properties we have properties in Orlando. We have 2 or 3 properties in Atlanta, and basically all the properties are located, or that I'm invested in, are in Georgia, and they're in Florida.
Got it. So you said that the company you were working with was doing the syndications. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was working with the company. I was working with them for 4 years. And while I'm currently still abroad, right? So I decided to start a company called Elite Podcast Bookings, which basically helps facilitate real estate investors getting on industry leading podcasts, helps them attract more capital, deal flow, and become thought leaders. And so when I was on, excuse me, so when I was when I used to have my show, right? I'd be going on other people's podcasts. I would have my show pitched, and I was just seeing this broken down in the industry, that it was basically being done very poorly. And I thought, all right, I could basically create this business. So in May 2020, I created Elite Podcast Bookings. We were able to get 1 or 2 clients. And then from there, we started to build the company. And then just recently, I decided to transition to Elite Podcast Bookings and make it my full-time employment and scale the business.
That's awesome. The whole podcast world. I mean, there's tons and tons of them, but the ability to niche into a specific genre or an audience,
For sure,
I think is definitely the cool thing with podcasts and the internet as a total, just to be able to find and attract an audience that you speak to, that's looking for what you have to present. So that's definitely different than buying an ad on the Super Bowl or something like that. You can really niche down to who exactly is looking for and provide, or wants the information you're providing. So let's talk a little bit about your experience as a podcast host and your experience as appearing on others, and then what you've seen with the clients you have with Elite, and what their journey has been, and kind of the success that they are seeing in their efforts to raise capital. Did you try and raise capital when you were a host on your own podcast?
Yeah, I mean, so when I started my podcast, I think my podcast was in syndication from, I could be wrong exactly with the years, but 2018 to the middle of 2019. So that's when I was just kind of joining the company. So I was more so just trying to get my foot in the door, trying to get my podcast up a little bit. But I basically started help raising capital from like 2019 onwards. And so, the assets under management we had were around like anywhere between 75 to like 90 million, right? So going from zero to seeing it all the way, basically start building up and getting progress. I saw investors coming through the door through multiple deals, helping raise capital, and basically saw how the process was done, right? And saw how we were doing it. And podcasting was one of the great ways we did it. For us, right? We had a client who went on a podcast, and they were able to raise $250 from one investor, or $250,000. Sorry, not $250, $250,000 from one investor from being on a podcast, right? And so one of the beautiful things about being on a podcast, I saw you had a bunch of episodes. How many episodes do you have now? It was over 100 or something. It was like 200.
Yeah, no, we're just shy of 400. We're somewhere in the, out of to check, but
Okay, so exactly, you're over 100, right? So
yeah.
you basically, you've put in the reps, right? So people that are going out and they're going on podcasts, right? So let's say you're selling a book, or you're trying to promote your business, or whatever have you. The first time somebody hears you, or the first time they hear Darren's podcast, they might like it, they might not like it, but they're not going to they might come back, right? But then if you have a second podcast, they're more likely to come back. Third, and then you start training people, and people start listening to Darren's message. It's the same thing with raising capital. If you just go on one podcast and expect people to hear you one time, and after that, they're going to come and give you thousands of dollars, you're probably wrong. Like American Express says, they have to have 7 different touch points. So if they hear you on Rod Khleif's podcast, and then they hear you on Darren's podcast, and then they hear you on Joe Fairless's podcast, now all of a sudden you start to become a thought leader, you start gaining some credibility, and then over time, people are going to reach out to you, they're going to get into your funnel, and then they'll be like, hey, you have a deal in Houston, why don't you add me to your mailing list? Oh, I'm interested. Now you have deal flow. Now you start attracting capital. Capital now comes to you before you were chasing capital. So it's kind of an upward trajectory spiral. And as you know, like you were just saying earlier, that, podcasting is a great way to basically niche down if you wanted to find people that are, going to be real estate investors, or you want to find somebody that's going to be lawyers, right? Lawyers probably listen to lawyer podcasts, or maybe they don't. Dentists, right? Or high net worth individuals. So you can basically really fine tune your niche that you want to target. And podcasting is a great way to do that. And me, I was in the private equity space, podcasting space. So just kind of had a good crossover, and I was able to help people facilitate and raise more capital. And that's what we're currently doing with Elite Podcast Bookings.
So you mentioned the reps kind of thing, the 7 touches. Do you, and I'm kind of curious, a long time ago when I was in college, I remember I was trying to sell something to a car dealer or something like that. And I was talking with him about, man, your ads are on all the time. And he says, it's funny, everybody thinks that, but the reality is there was like some sort of a sequencing that they went, that they knew that if they were on like 3 times one day, or I don't know, a bunch in one day, that the saturation point would hit, as opposed to having, like 1 ad per day kind of a thing. And I'm kind of curious, you mentioned the 7 touches. Is there a number of shows, or is there any kind of math that you find that is more beneficial for one of your clients if they're looking to get the word out? Is there a
there's no necessarily concrete number, right? So we'll just put it in probably more layman's terms, like something that everybody can relate to, or something like that. So if you were trying to run a mile, right, and you were trying to run a sub 10-minute mile, now if you were 20 pounds overweight or 30 pounds overweight, or whether you have come from an athletic background, like everybody's going to have different progress before they get to the sub 10-minute mile, right? So for the way I would explain it to people is that basically the more reps you put in over time, the more likely you are to see success. So I can't tell somebody, hey, after you've been on 4 podcasts, you will have raised $300,000 and 4 is the sweet spot. So what I typically tell people is the longer that they stay in, the more likely they are to see success, right? So the longer you go to the gym, if you do that for 6 months, will you see 6-pack abs? You might see some toned muscles. You might feel better about yourself. It's basically a lagging indicator. You go for 2 years, you go for a year. Now all of a sudden come back and tell me, like, that's what I usually tell people, right? It's like after a year, if you haven't seen results, like something's wrong, right? And all of our clients, we have a retention rate of, we've only been in business for 2 years, and the average client's been with us for 1.5 years. So the people that just come and go, they don't usually see results because they're not that committed, but the people that are committed to the process do see results.
Got it. And as far as your business is to get your client on other people's podcasts. Do you work with them about how to message and how to be on point to where they're more effective, or is that kind of left to them?
So one of the main things, right, is everybody always wants the biggest exposure, right? People are like, can you get me on Joe Fairless? Can you get me on not Joe Fairless, I'm sorry, Joe Rogan. Can you get me on Joe Rogan? Can you get me on Tim Ferriss's podcast? Like they throw out the 13 million downloads per episode. Like they're like, I want to be on those ones. Like, okay, I understand it. But the way I explain it to people is, if you were to go on Joe Rogan's podcast, and let's say one person were to enter your funnel, and or you go on Darren's podcast, and now all of a sudden 5 people enter your funnel and you get 3 investors, like which one would you think is more successful? And people would probably say like, oh, I went on Darren's. I was able to get 5 people on my mailing list and I got 3 investors from it. And Joe Rogan was great. It was cool, but I only got 1 investor. Now, what I tell people is that when they come in and they usually are on these podcasts, what's broken down is the call to action typically. So like on your show, you might say like, hey, Matthew, where can people best find you or connect with you? And typically when people go on a podcast, they say, oh, Darren, thanks for having me. Here's my number. 303-965, blah, 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 blah. Oh, also my email is Matthew@elitepodcastbookings.com. I also really love to talk real estate, and I'm also on LinkedIn. Now you see, it's like I listened to the whole thing. Podcasting is a very intimate experience, right? It's not like a song where you can pick it up in the middle and you're like, oh, I love this song. Oh, this is catchy here. No, the demographic of people that listen to podcasts is usually more sophisticated. They're usually gathering information. They're working out at the gym. They're listening to it in their car. So if they listen to a 30-minute podcast, by the time they get to the end, that's almost their reward. And then when you deliver a long, drawn out call to action, they're less susceptible to go into your funnel, right? You want them to basically set down everything they're doing and take action as soon as possible. So if your call to action has scarcity into it, you could say, hey, within the next, with the first 2 people to listen to me and say that they email me and say they listen to Darren's podcast, we'll get a free book autographed by me, or a free 30-minute coaching, or an exclusive offer to my boot camp for the first 2 people, right? But it has to have basically scarcity to it, and you have to have a strong, clear call to action. And we basically help people facilitate their call to action, what they should be looking for, what they should be doing. And a lot of times that helps real estate investors because, excuse me, real estate investors, right? It's almost like a good old boys club. They know how to close deals and stuff, but as far as like the marketing aspect is concerned, they don't necessarily know it. They just kind of are like, I know how to like underwrite, raise capital, get new deals. I know nothing about marketing. I know nothing about social media. And that's where we usually come in.
Got it. As far as, excuse me, as far as the promotion of the episode that the individual's on, do you do anything or do you recommend that the guest have their own kind of a platform? Are they active on social media as well? Or is there any kind of...
Yeah. So, I mean, the more platforms you have in general, right, the better it is. So we are actually in the process of building out a social media management for our clients. And one of the things that we're going to start doing is breaking down their content on podcasts into micro content that they're going to be able to push out to their network. So usually if you're on a podcast, let's say your podcast or a different podcast, they might say, hey, your podcast episode is live. And maybe they give you some deliverables. Maybe they'll give you a little infographic with a sound wave that might have like a 20-second sound clip, right? But one, nobody will listen to those little sound waves, and everything is very visual nowadays. So what we're going to start doing is breaking down like a 30-second clip, a sound bite, having high quality audio, high quality captions, writing that. So when people start getting that, they'll be able to push it out to their network. So if you had 1,000 followers, I'll just make this up, 1,000 followers on LinkedIn, 1,000 followers on Twitter, 1,000 followers on Instagram, and 1,000 followers on TikTok, right? And now all of a sudden you as a guest are perceived as more valuable because you now offer exposure, right? It's almost like a give and take relationship. I'm on Darren's podcast. Darren has 50,000 downloads per episode. I get exposure. I offer my information to Darren's audience. It's a give and take relationship, right? But if I also have 1,000 followers across the board, having me on a guest will be beneficial for your show as well, because I will promote it to my audience and I'll push it out to my network. So the more, we'll say your social score, the more perceived value you have across your different accounts, the more likely you are to be able to reciprocate that message. So it definitely does add value. So if I wanted to get on Joe Rogan's podcast and you were to say, okay, I have, 100,000 Twitter followers, 100,000 Instagram followers, these are more likely, they're vanity metrics, but they're going to perk people's ears up and they're going to be more likely to let you in through the Golden Gate, right? But if you say, oh, like, I don't really promote, I don't have a newsletter, I don't have a website, right? These are all things that you're not taking serious. If you've had 400 podcast episodes, you're doing something right, right? So people already know you're taking serious. This is a guy that's going to show up. He's going to deliver. He has a great podcast and he probably has an audience. who would listen to him if he doesn't have 400 episodes, right? You're not doing it for fun. And so it's a great way to basically push a message out there.
No, it's interesting how the value of the guest, and I'm not saying that we, are looking for. I mean, we've had plenty of guests that haven't, but it's more about the topic that they, or the story they have, or whatever it is that we wanted to talk with them. But just in kind of the bigger scheme, like the Rogans and some of your bigger platforms, how and not just, it's not limited to that. I mean, I think I've seen, like, where models and stuff, anybody that has a following on whatever the platform is has more value than somebody that doesn't, and the ability to get more exposure for, kind of like you said, the kind of the trade-off there. So it's an interesting dynamic how it's changed
Yeah,
over
for
time,
sure.
and how easy it is for one to get a following. It's not necessarily limited to your budget or the capital, just more a matter of some effort, or whether you employ somebody to do it or whatever. But to get a following, to grow an audience, and to be on point where they know what you're going to be talking about. It's fascinating to me how it all works.
Yeah, and this can also include, blogs. It can also include newsletters. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I have 0 followers across the board. Okay. Maybe you've been writing about entrepreneurship for 2 years now, and you have a newsletter of 2 or 3,000 people, right? Or you have a blog and you receive, 5,000 unique visits per month and a 0 bounce rate, right? So there's definitely, like, you have to kind of think outside the box, right? Like when I lived in Thailand, I wanted to get involved in real estate in America. Like, how easy would it be for me to say, well, I don't live there, right? But now all of a sudden I have 700 plus unit portfolio. People are living in San Francisco and they're afraid to, invest in Oregon, right? Like they don't want to drive 2 hours because they think, oh, it's too far. But now that basically COVID has happened, right? Like you have to basically, almost in a sense, think more creatively. You have to think outside the box. So if you're like, okay, I don't have any followers, like, do you have a newsletter? Do you have a blog? I mean, do you have a following at do you have a meetup, right? A local meetup? How many people are in your meetup? 30? Like, what if 5 people listen to your episodes or whatever you're trying to promote? You just got to think about that. How big is your network? How big is your network at the office? How big is your network at, the football, soccer club you're in? Everybody has a network. It's just a matter of using that leverage to gain more access to what you want. And then from there, it's just about growing it and nurturing it and cultivating it. And just over time, it'll grow. And that's what, there's no exact science to it. It's more of a science, or sorry, it's more of an art, not a science. There we go.
So let me ask you, you mentioned several different platforms and types of ways to communicate, whether it be a newsletter or one of the trendy platforms. Is there a baseline minimum that you encourage people that are looking specifically in real estate investing,
Mm-hmm.
that they shoot for, or work to have, so they can grow their
In what
following?
sense? You're saying like a number of followers, or
Well, if
what's
somebody, I'm just saying somebody's trying to raise capital, uh,
mm,
and because my curiosity is more, the TikTok kind of thing. I know it's a trendy thing, but I've seen a lot of people,
yeah.
I've put in commercial real estate or whatever, and there are people on there that have a
Yeah.
message and stuff, and I'm curious if that's more of a like a bait that then you get them to go to the website, or
Mhm.
is the bulk of the content be
So
delivered on any one platform, or?
it's all how you looked at it, right? So TikTok is usually, TikTok is shorter form content, right? And usually the demographic for LinkedIn is more professionals, right? So if your target demographic was, let's say, high net worth individuals, now that's not to say that there's there's not going to be them on TikTok, but let's say the higher demographic like that is going to be on more LinkedIn. So if you're targeting doctors, lawyers, business professionals, entrepreneurs, LinkedIn is probably going to be a better avenue to go and target. Now sorry, my camera turned off. As far as, sorry, the other part, I lost my train of thought.
Well, no, I was just, you were talking about LinkedIn, and I was just asking, is there an ideal number of platforms, or is there an ideal platform specifically for a real estate investor?
Yeah. So what I would say, like if you're raising capital, right? So basically, with any raising capital preservation is going to be number one. People want to make sure that you're not going to be losing their money, right? So when you're initially starting out raising capital, who are you probably going to turn to? You're probably going to turn to people that already trust you, like know and trust you, which are probably going to be friends and family. So initially, you're probably not going to be able to raise, $500 million, $3 million, whatever. It might be $200,000. So what I would say is piggyback off your most recent successes. So if you raise one deal and you've raised $100,000 and you've taken the property and the property's gone full cycle, you can say, look, I invested I've raised $100,000 with a couple of my investors. And like, let's say I'm talking to you, Darren, and I could say, I helped raise $100,000. Now, do you know that was from my mom and from my brother? No, it's true. I helped raise $100,000, right? And then you're like, okay. And what was their returns? Oh, after 3 years, it was a 2x equity multiple. So their money doubled in 3 years. Oh, wow, that's great. Now I'm raising money for a new property. And this new property is located in Austin, Texas. And this is the sponsor. We're working with this. This is what we're doing. And now all of a sudden, next deal, you're able to raise maybe $300,000. And then the third deal, you raise $700,000. And it keeps snowballing from there. And as long as you're, basically being ethical, right? You're putting yourself out there, creating content, you're expanding, growing your network, whether you're going to meetups virtually or you're going to meetups in person, right? You're basically growing your network. And when you're growing, people say your net worth is your network. Your network is your network is your net worth, right? So as long as you're kind of curating that, that's probably the best way to go about doing it. But as far as, which platform to necessarily choose, I was going to say, if you're looking for high net worth individuals, LinkedIn is probably the best bet, but not to say that there's not other high net worth individuals on other platforms. That's where I would just initially start.
Got it. No, I'm always kind of amused. I was talking even with my son. He's telling me about one of his little gamer friends that was like, doing TikTok and, had created some YouTube channel that has like exploded because of his TikTok activities. And I'm like, this cross pollination and how to use them and stuff is interesting. But I think to your point, knowing who you're looking for is, I think, the first thing. And then having the message and messaging to those people that you're looking for. And again, if you've got experience telling your story and especially if you're trying to raise capital, like I said, preservation of capital, that's got to be an important part of the message.
Yeah. If your brother's friend was trying to, we just want to reverse it. Your brother's friend, I'm sorry, your son's friend, if he was trying to do the same gaming thing on LinkedIn, right? If he's trying to get those people that were like, there's not many gamers here at midnight online, like wanting to play Call of Duty or whatever. Like, so they probably know exactly who their avatar is as well.
Yeah. No, and I, it's, I think the challenge I think anybody has when you're, staring at the computer screen or you're trying to do this and you're being bombarded by all these messages and all that. One is, understanding who you are trying to attract, and then recognizing where they are and then tailoring your message so that it lands with the audience you're seeking is crucial. And then put in the reps, if you try something that doesn't work, then, modify or change or whatever, and keep doing it. As far as your your guests, we've talked about kind of one of the big things, the call to action. I love that because it is amazing to me, and I'm guilty of it. I think everybody is providing too many opportunities as opposed to just the one point. Here's the one thing I want you to do. Go to this point. Is there a, I don't know, we've talked about kind of the staying with it. Is there any kind of uh, uh, a measure of success that you would expect? I mean, we've talked about like, gym reps and that kind of thing, but is it if somebody is putting out more content, meeting with more people, doing more is going to equal more, or is there a and I don't know if there's even a way to measure it. I guess it's basically.
I think I understand where you're going with it. I mean, as far as, I would say the most successful capital raisers that I know, they are always building their network, right? And so when you do not want to start building your network, when you need your network, right? So if you already have an established network and let's say you lose your job, and then those people that lose their job find a new job by, the month's end, right? It's like, how do they do that? Right? Because they're just constantly staying on the top of people's minds. And it doesn't necessarily have to be from a capital raising standpoint, right? Like think about like your own family members. Like it's not that hard to reach out to your cousin who you grew up with and say, hey man, like Merry Christmas, I was thinking of you, like here's an old photo, right? It's like, oh wow, like you were thinking of me, that was thoughtful. Like, yeah, we haven't seen each other in 2 years, but I can't wait to get home this next Christmas and we see each other. And then you guys see each other and then you reconnect, and it's just like you never left, right? But all of a sudden, if you get that call from that cousin who you haven't seen since high school graduation, it's been 18 years, and it's like, I bet Jordan wants something from me. And it's like, hey, how you been? You're like, I'm great. Like, what's up? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, lost my job. And it's like, okay, you want to stay at my house, like you want something, I haven't heard from you, right? So I would say the most successful people, like we're kind of saying, is, they're putting in the reps. So if you are not curating your network, or you're someone that's just not trying to really make that effort, it's going to be a lot harder to raise capital. So I guess in a long roundabout way, it's probably more about consistency and putting in the reps. But it's up to you to, when we speak, right, we kind of help set the benchmark of what you determine as is successful. So if you're saying, hey, I have a deal coming up and I'm looking to close or raise, $1.5 million or $2 million. It's like, okay, all right, well, I would recommend we get you on this many podcasts before. They usually come out like a month or two later. And this will help you gain a lot of traction and momentum. So also, once you're pushing it out to your network, Darren, I'll push it out to my network. If I'm raising capital for 3 months and I've been on 8 podcasts, now all of a sudden I can consistently push out content on my end. I can break it up. I could say, hey, look, I was featured in this. Now I'm perceived as a thought leader. Maybe I'm featured in a couple other articles. Maybe I'm also doing a couple guest speaking appearances at some conferences. And now all of a sudden, when I'm going into raising capital, I'm perceived as that much more of a hot commodity, as opposed to somebody that's starting to build their newsletter 2 months before they need to raise capital. And now I'm somebody that's trying to build a website and build a business before I need the money. Right now, all of a sudden, the person that's doing that is becoming a needy person. They need, as opposed to a person that's providing value to their audience, providing value to their potential future investors. And now it's a give and take relationship. And now they feel more comfortable because they put in the reps and now they've been seen. And it's just a cycle that goes around and around.
Yeah. No, definitely something you don't want to be, appearing as somebody in need, kind of thing, but, put in the reps and like you said, always be growing your network and, create the content and have that kind of base and grow. I think it's pretty sound strategy. If you look at anybody and anything they're doing, if you start with zero, you got to get the first one, and once you get the first one, then you go to the second one, and you keep building that way. But I think that consistency message too. I mean, about it's not just the sprint trying to get to where you're going, but people see your progress and know they can find you, and you keep showing up, whether it be you're saying, hey, I was thinking about you, or they saw you on something, or there's just this constant thread of you putting out your content, and I would think that's a lot more successful or oriented, rather than, like you said, the hey, I need this, need that, or trying to get it all at one time, as opposed to just kind of staying with it. So
For sure.
appreciate that. Hey, Matthew, if we could, I'd like to shift gears here for a second. By day, I'm an insurance broker, and I work with my clients to assess risk and determine what to do with the risk. And there's 3 different strategies we typically look at. We first look to see if there's a way we can avoid the risk. And when that's not an option, we look to see if there's a way we can minimize the risk. And when it looks like we cannot avoid nor minimize the risk, then we look to see if there's a way we can transfer the risk. And that's what an insurance policy is. It's a risk transfer vehicle. And as such, I like to ask my guests if they can look at their own situation. It could be clients, investors, tenants, the market, politics, however you would like to identify what you consider to be the biggest risk.
Mm-hmm.
And for clarification, while again, I'm an insurance broker, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance related answer.
Mm.
And so if you're willing, I'd like to ask you, Matthew Baltzell, what is the biggest risk?
Yeah. So I thought about this, and I don't know. I was formulating this thought. I mean, I've had this thought before, and it's always constantly stuck with me. And so, there's a movie called Schindler's List, right? And in the movie, somebody asks Schindler, and they say, Schindler, like, why do we never see you drink? And he says, why I never drink? Because the reason why I don't drink is because when I drink, I give up all my power. And when I first heard that, I was like, whoa, I was blown away, right? And so when you have your power, right, you have leverage. You actually have power. And when you say things like, I can't go to the movie, right? It's like you're giving up like your power, instead of like saying, I choose not to go to the movie. Like, I don't want to go to the movie. Hey, can you come over for dinner tonight? I can't make it. It's like, you can make it, but you choose not to make it, right? So basically, giving up your power is one of the greatest risks. So if you're giving up your leverage within your business, you're giving up your risk, right? If you're giving up, cutting corners on underwriting deals, you're giving away your risk. You're giving away your power. So I would say giving up your power is the greatest detriment that a person could do, and giving up my power, my voice, my opinion, my skill set, that to me would be the greatest risk.
No, I like it. That just even the way you position the situation, same outcome, but it's the way you position it. Either you retain the power or surrender the power. That's good. Hey, Matthew, where can the listeners go if they'd like to learn more or connect with you?
Yeah, Darren, I appreciate it. So if people want to learn more about me, they can go to elitepodcastbookings.com. They can go in the upper right-hand corner and they can schedule a call. And if they enter in the promo code Darren, they will get 50% off their first months of service with us. So they can go there.
Awesome. Matthew, I can't say thanks enough for taking the time to talk today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, learned a lot, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Likewise, Darren, appreciate it.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CRE PN Radio.